I want to talk to you guys today about a topic that often makes my eyes roll: trends. You should never strive to create content that looks like everyone else's. Do not look at a style that is everywhere and already oversaturated and think that you have to create that style for your brand. It's important to be really cautious about trends in content, and it's important to use a high level of discernment when you are approaching a content trend. You want your brand to be shoppable and relevant, agnostic of what's going on in culture. I love working with Pilot House because while we are a performance marketing agency, we really pride ourselves on caring so much about brand and creative. At Pilot House, we don't just make ads, we craft them. Every edit, every word, every scroll-stopping detail is built with purpose and care, and I truly believe that care drives creativity and creativity drives results. Our attention to both scale and brand allows us to craft strategies that deliver you short-term results while making you long-term successful, which is so important for any DTC brand. If you are curious about learning more about working with Pilot House, you can fill out a lead form at pilothouse.co and let them know you want to go on a brand new ad venture. You don't actually have to say that. You don't have to make a pun. I'm not going to force you to make a pun. Just fill out the lead form. We'd love to chat with you. Hi, welcome back to Ad-venturous, the podcast produced by DTC and hosted by me, Aves. If you know me in my personal life, which I honestly don't think a lot of people who know me in my personal life listen to this podcast, my very best friend in the whole world actually once described the experience of listening to this podcast as quote unquote really weird. And I'm super happy that she didn't leave that as formal feedback on Spotify, but rather told that to me directly when we were going to the beach. Anyway, if you know me in my personal life, you know that I do lean towards being a little bit, I guess, pretentious is the word. I'm not a huge trend type of girly. I have always marched to the beat of my own drum. I believe that is a combination of being an only child, also the youngest cousin sort of in my family for a long time, and also being an Aries plus an avid reader has made me sort of uninterested in what the world and culture at large is up to, and I just sort of live in my own little Aves bubble. And I was reflecting when I was preparing this episode how that has impacted my approach to work as a sort of content strategist across the interwebs. Because I want to talk to you guys today about a topic that often makes my eyes roll, which is trends. But I want to do it in a way that I hope is constructive and very helpful, because something that I do not believe in is sort of chasing trends, and something I've really shied away from and never done, whether it's here on the podcast or on LinkedIn, is share like trending ad styles. I think that by the time something hits, marketing focused podcast or LinkedIn, anything like that, the trend is already so oversaturated that the content is really not helping your brand anymore, but in my opinion, sort of damaging it. So I want to talk about trends, but I want to do it in a way that is, like I mentioned, really constructive and also helpful. So I want to break this episode down into talking about cultural trends versus content trends, because I think it's very important to draw a distinction between the two and to know how to operate within each sort of focus today. So cultural trends, what is just going on in the general zeitgeist? And then content trends, what are we seeing a lot of? What are people leaning towards? Whether it's like font styles, brand tone, all of that stuff. So we're going to break down those two ideas and how to best, like I mentioned, move within them to actually use trends to further your brand and not just sort of erase any actual identity. Like I mentioned, in my personal life, I tend to be a little bit pretentious. If everyone is doing something or wearing something, I like to make a point of not doing that thing. Again, I am an Aries. I was born also in the year of the ox, so it's like I got a lot going on. And I really don't want to do what other people are doing, because there is a streak in me that is very non-conformist boots. So anyway, I don't like to depend on trends when I develop social strategies. And this has been something that I have thought about and paid a lot of attention to since I was a little baby marketer way back in the day. I have always strived to not fit into a feed, but rather create moments that stand out. And I think that is a large contributing factor to why I've found a lot of success with the brands that I work with and success in the content styles that I create. It's because my main goal is always to create ads that do not look like other ads that people are seeing. And the reason for that is really simple. And it comes back to like sort of pre-iOS 14, like way back in the day. I just want the ads that I create to draw attention, period. It's such a like baseline goal, but it's really helped me control the urge to jump on top of any type of content trend that I see. I know that a lot of folks, when they first get into either building a brand or they've just become marketers themselves, it feels like you have to stay on top of specifically content trends to sort of prove your worth almost in the industry. And I just want to say, I fundamentally disagree with that sentiment. You should not be striving to produce content, whether that content is for your own sort of personal brand or whether it's for a brand that you're working with. You should never strive to create content that looks like everyone else's. One example that I've been using a lot is those like apology style text only ads. I swear if I see another one of those, I'm going to freak out. It's one of those content types that obviously worked for a couple people who were early adopters. And then it was like at some point, everyone's feed became a little bit oversaturated with like fake apologies and just saying that like, oh, we're saying goodbye to these top selling styles. We've all seen them. And so I think what that does is it almost can cheapen a brand because you're not a distinct voice out there on the feed. You're just part of the overall cacophony of noisy ads. And I think that, like I mentioned, that can be a little bit more damaging to brands than if you just did your own thing. One of the greatest compliments I ever received was from a meta rep who works directly with a brand that I work with. And sometimes I feel like he said that he listens to this. So if you're listening to this episode, dude, don't mention it on our next call. But anyway, one of the greatest compliments I've ever received was from him post Q4. And he said this brand I was working with that, we were making ads that did not look like any other ads that he saw sort of that season. And that was the biggest accomplishment for me because that is always the goal. So like I mentioned, it's like a piece of old lady wisdom. By the way, I'm about to turn 29. So I've just decided that I'm in my 30s. So you're going to hear a lot of old lady wisdom from this point on. But don't try to make ads that look like everyone else. Do not look at a style that is everywhere and already oversaturated and think that you have to create that style for your brand. I've talked about this with Eric on All Killer No Filler before, but if a trend doesn't make sense for your brand, you have no business participating in it. If it is just, again, adding to this cacophony of noisy sale ads or noisy styles of creator content, if it's not helping you stand out, it's not really worth your effort. And I know it's also a lot easier to produce content at scale as some people start to add AI into their workflows. I see you. Still, it doesn't make any sense. You might say, well, Aves, it's low effort and it's low labor. But just because, and I find myself sort of having this opinion on a lot of AI-driven content and creative, just because it is low effort does not mean that it is worth that low effort. And it also does not mean that it won't damage your brand. I think that's something that people miss a lot in this conversation. Again, especially because it's like, well, I'll give my LLM the original ad. I'll get it to spin up a quick iteration of it for my brand. I don't even have to work on the copy. And yes, that's going to take you very little time, but you run the risk of it damaging your brand or it just costing you money in the long run to run that ad if you're running it on paid instead of running something that works. So I really want to caution you against just hopping on the bandwagon and making trends for the sake of it. That was, again, like I mentioned, I'm not really in my 30s yet, but spiritually I am. And so there's going to be a lot of old lady rants passing on wisdom. And that is a big piece of wisdom that I have for you. Rant over. Do not hop on trends just because you can. Let's get into some more constructive ideas and some workflows and potential hacks to operating within trends in a way that makes sense, because they happen fast now, whether it's cultural trends. So let's start there, talk about how to cooperate with culture rather than co-opt it. This is something I say quite a bit. If you start sort of co-opting genuine culture from people, that just pisses people off. So let's talk about how to cooperate with culture. Let's talk about some examples of sort of cultural trends, and then dig into some examples of those examples on how you can use that to create content and use these cultural trends as a jumping off point. So in my opinion, I've just mentioned this and I've mentioned this on previous podcasts, but cooperating with culture versus co-opting culture fundamentally makes or breaks a brand's long-term ability to stay relevant. If you go in and find ways to make a cultural moment relevant to your brand, it's going to, again, set you up for success in the long run rather than trying to steamroll a cultural moment, almost have your brand wrap around it completely, steal it from what people are organically doing, and then you've sort of, what is that expression? You've put all your eggs in one basket if you co-opt culture, in my opinion. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to do. I think an interesting example to walk through today is this idea of analog offline living. Huge fan. I love not being on my phone. Don't get me wrong. I also love being on my phone, but I think it's good for all of us to step away every now and again. And we're seeing lots of commentary about this, right? We're seeing lots of folks start to speculate that offline living is the new luxury, that being analog, finding analog hobbies, really becoming more and more of a cultural trend. It's something people are participating in. It's not a type of content that we're making. It's not a way that brands are accessing different demographics. It's just something people are doing naturally. I have to say, this isn't really relevant. One thing I do think is very funny is people, and I'm sort of guilty of this on my own TikTok, filming themselves doing analog hobbies and then posting it on the internet. So funny. I do that. It doesn't really matter, you know? It's fine to do. I like sharing my junk journal journey. Anyway, so it's like a cultural moment and trend. People looking to fill their lives with more analog offline hobbies, which is always a good thing. And so let's talk about how that is applicable to a brand. So when I talk about co-opting culture, I'm going to, you guys know it, I always do, use my make-believe coffee cup company for this one. But if you are my make-believe coffee cup company, a way that you would co-opt culture, which is what we don't want to do, which basically means like strong-arming your way into a cultural movement as a brand, would be in releasing products and content that only focus on being offline, you know? So I know because I do it. I love doing this, by the way. Perfect like Saturday morning for me. I love to be on my iPad and drink a cup of coffee. It is, oh my goodness, so good to play on my iPad and drink a cup of coffee on the weekend. But if I were running my coffee cup company and wanted to co-opt this moment in culture where we're talking about offline activities, I would build a version of the cup that was like only usable outside. That is a very outlandish example, but I think it's kind of fun sometimes to go to the extreme. So I'm building this coffee cup. You can only use it outside. And all of my marketing, every USP about this cup is about how it only opens up. It's a travel cup and it only opens up when you are like not within cell service. I don't know how I made that product. It would be pretty cool if I could, but I've coded it somehow. We only open up to drink coffee when you have no cell service. And so what that's doing is it's isolating everyone who's not participating in this cultural trend. And it's also doing something that I think is kind of icky, which is taking culture and using it as an opportunity to make money. And it's a very fine line because that is a large part of what I do. But what's very interesting to me is when brands, like I mentioned, start to fully focus their product roadmap, all of their marketing materials are all about this singular thing. So my make-believe coffee cup company might also start making coffee cups that sit on an easel. It sits on an easel, and so that when you're doing your offline activity, which is painting, you can sip it like a hamster, you know, drinking water. To be honest, It's kind of a little bit of a smash. Don't steal that idea if you're out there and you make coffee cups. But you know what I mean? It's like you start pivoting so that all of your content, all of your product development matches this moment in culture. And I have to tell you something, as someone who is a bit of a sociology nerd, a girly who used to work in political strategy, culture shifts all the time. History tends to run in patterns. So while we are in this moment right now where with the rise of AI, folks are really starting to look to get offline, and we've also all been online for quite a while, it makes sense that people are looking for a breather. But you have to remember, when you're a brand, you want to run the long game. And so really betting heavy on a cultural trend or moment isn't going to allow you to continue to grow as a brand in the future. If you spend all this time and money and marketing on positioning yourself as the coffee cup for people with offline hobbies and activities that they like to do, then in 3-5 years' time, when we're all walking around with VR headsets, because that is the cultural trend of the moment, you're going to be like shit out of luck. I can't think of any other way to describe it. You're just going to have no leg to stand on. You're not going to have anything evergreen that works sort of autonomously to what people are doing and thinking about on a larger cultural scale. So you really want to make sure, again, that you're not co-opting culture. You're not inserting yourself into a moment in time too aggressively as a brand. And you have to remember at all times that you are a brand, you're not a person, right? So if I want to pivot this podcast or my LinkedIn or my TikTok into just talking about offline all day, every day, I am free to do that because I'm a person, and a person's opinions can change, but a brand is a lot bigger of a ship to change directions, if that makes sense. So if, again, you've put all this effort and time and thinking into building yourself up to be an offline brand, then it's going to be very difficult to reposition yourself in the right direction when that sort of cultural trend shifts. Something I try to remind brands of that I work with or speak with directly is that you want your brand to be shoppable and relevant, agnostic of what's going on in culture. Because I think now we live in times that are we live in a very quick turnaround period. A great example is sort of micro trends in fashion. What people were searching for in droves 2 years ago is no longer relevant. I find this really interesting to look at data behind what skincare makeup brands are doing, but you see this a lot with those guys where they are always sort of chasing cultural trends. It's a little bit easier to do in that vertical because it's easier to build products and then remove them from your catalog. But if you're a business with sub 20 SKUs and you're relatively small, it's really dangerous to get into that idea of building a brand that fits the cultural moment exactly, because it's probably not going to be relevant in a few years. So cultural trends, really high level, it's just what people are doing. It's how real people are living their lives. It's what's going on in the general zeitgeist. The takeaway from thinking about cultural trends is, again, I say this all the time, you just want to make sure that you are cooperating with culture. You're not co-opting it, because that is a way to protect your brand and also not be annoying to consumers. So it's a way to make sure that you've got the longevity, but also not inserting yourself as a brand where you kind of have no business being. The second half of this episode, I want to talk about content trends. And this is where I roll my eyes time and time again. Content trends, like I mentioned at the top, it's oftentimes not worth participating in. And what infuriates me more than sort of creative styles is trends that we see in how brands are shipped to us. So this is a conversation around, common font usage and also common aesthetics that brands will leverage. A lot of the times what we'll see is content trends tend to be directly inspired by cultural trends. And so it's another reason why, co-opting culture doesn't really make a lot of sense, because you want to stand out. You want to be different. You want to, in a way, disrupt a marketplace oftentimes if you're a brand. If you want to fade into the background like that Homer Simpson meme, go for it. Sounds boring. It also sounds not scalable. But if you want to, like I said, fade in the background, go ahead. get into the co-opting culture, get into these content trends. But if you want to build a brand that stands out and excites people and has huge potential for scale, what you want to do is be very cautious around sort of living in the marketing echo chamber. This is something I think about a lot. And so you oftentimes, when you're thinking about content trends, should try to remove yourself from your professional mind. So the example I have on content trends is, let's talk about sensory marketing and sensory content. It's similar to the text only kind of we apologize placement ads. I don't want to see another picture of a product with a bunch of food around it. I'm being so for real. Keep the waffles at home, okay? No more honey, no more citrus. I'm so sick of seeing food in product imagery where it does not necessarily belong. And this is one of those things that comes down from a cultural trend into a content trend. And then all of a sudden, everybody and their dog nonstop with the food-based imagery. If you have a reason to have food in your product photography, I am not boo-hooing you. If you sell flavored water, please let me see a picture of a dragon fruit if it's dragon fruit flavored. If you sell a lip gloss, it's okay to include some imagery if your flavors are inspired by food. Not too much now, but a little bit is fine. Like, it's not going to kill anyone. If you are selling leggings and the color is like bright red and you're calling it strawberry surprise, I don't really want to see any pictures of strawberries with the leggings. It just is too much, you guys. Cool the jets on the food, okay? If you are looking to do a shoot and inspire some summertime whimsy, leave the ice cream cone at home. You don't necessarily need it. And this is now just turning into another rant, so I'm going to wrap it up on these examples, which I feel like are all coming from like real ads that I've seen. But what I'm ranting about is just basically this phenomenon where everyone starts talking about sensory marketing, right? And we all talk about how, oh my gosh, it must be working. Rode's doing it all the time. I talk about Rode on this podcast a lot, by the way, because I feel like people in general talk about Rode. And Rode to me is similar to Hexclad, where it's like, yeah, well, Gordon Ramsay's right there. Hailey Bieber's right there. That's why the ads are working. Don't get it twisted. Anyway, sensory marketing is one of those things that I think marketers got really excited about, and then everybody was doing it in droves. And like I mentioned, Rode is a prime example. They do it a lot, but Rode also has Hailey Bieber. It's Hailey freaking Bieber. I was saying this like last week or 2 weeks ago. Oh my goodness. Do you know how much I love Justin Bieber? Do you know how many times I watched his Grammy performance? It was nuts. So it's like you have to consider the brand that's making something like that work. You have to consider the Bieber of it all. Or, like I mentioned, Hexclad, the Gordon Ramsay of it all. He's just there. I love Gordon Ramsay as well. Kitchen Nightmares, one of the best reality shows you will ever watch. It is so entertaining. But anyway, you have to consider why those types of brands are doing something. And oftentimes they're playing a totally different game than you are. If you are just someone who has recently founded a brand, again, you don't necessarily have, or not even recently founded, but if you just have a regular DTC brand and you don't have someone who is Gordon Ramsay or Hailey Bieber level of famous, you have to think about the advantages that are given to them versus what you actually need to do with your marketing and product photography. And I think the sensory marketing one is a great example of folks taking brands with big spokespeople, big budgets, sort of like huge Super Bowl budgets, and going, let's trickle that down to us. And that is not how the marketing economy works. What you have to do is think about, is this valuable content for the people that I'm trying to convince to purchase this product? Does it even sort of make sense for them? Am I just becoming part of the cacophony of noise of ads that all look very similar by participating in this trend? I think I'm so sort of heated again by the idea of sensory marketing because things like a photo shoot, it's not cheap, right? And I really love working with brands who are looking to scale and looking to get aggressive and do exciting things. And I think oftentimes One thing that really irks me is misallocation of resources, which is such a dorky thing to get annoyed about. But I just think oftentimes it's sort of a waste of time. And like I mentioned, we get stuck in this weird echo chamber where we're all hearing the same positive and hyped up takes on things like sensory marketing. Everyone does them, and then the market becomes oversaturated and you're left with nothing. So it's important to be really cautious about trends in content, and it's important to use a high level of discernment when you are approaching a content trend. I'm not saying, again, if it's relevant to your brand, you're selling a lip gloss, it is ice cream cone flavored, please take a picture of it with an ice cream cone. So cute. But if I'm selling my make-believe travel mugs and I have a new color and I'm calling it vanilla swirl, it's like enough with putting ice cream and enough with calling things sensory food-based names as well. We're all over it. But the level of discernment is something I want to sort of double tap into with you guys, because it's something I've, like I mentioned, talked about on All Killer No Filler with Eric before, but I think it's really important for brands who are, sort of sub maybe 50 mil a year and you're still growing that actual brand. You might not have a ton of brand recognition. It is very important to be consistent. It's important to, of course, try new things, but it is very important to have a consistent point of view on your product and point of view on the person who wants to buy your product. And so something I've talked about a lot, and I love mentioning this, especially if we're talking about me being a little bit on the pretentious side and marching to the beat of my own drum. Pre-Andromeda, I was all about preaching this idea that we needed to understand intent before we even start making content. And we need to understand what drives the person we're speaking to. For a few years now, I've been on sort of this constant tirade that post iOS 14, when we were talking about what drives performance on top of funnel channels, especially something like Meta, it is often going to be how well your creative speaks to the person that you want to make a purchase. And now with the changes to meta deliverability with Andromeda, it is like written in stone that this is the way to do it. So when I talk about using a level of discernment to understand if you should participate in content trends or not, what I'm really saying is you have to have done the homework and the research to understand your target persona so that you know if a trend in content is even relevant to them. And then you also add in this additional layer that just, I think, comes with time and familiarity, where you start to understand how to translate your value props, your USPs into a piece of content that invokes a trend, but also speaks directly to your target persona. Like I mentioned, that just comes with sort of reps and understanding who these folks are and what they want to see and what adds value to their lives. We talked about that last week. What can you do to actually provide real value outside of the product that you sell? So all of those things coming together for a single, static ad or a single piece of creator content, it's a ton of information to funnel into like one point. But once you, like I mentioned, do the homework and once you actually understand who you're talking to, the work becomes a lot less scary and difficult, in my opinion. And also you see higher rates of success because the content you're making is much more relevant than just hopping on trends. So the kind of two big takeaways, we talked about cultural trends. You want to cooperate with culture, not co-opt it. You don't exist in a vacuum, but you also have to think about the long-term health of your brand. So making sure you are highly relevant to your target personas while also playing with moments in culture. And then on the content trend side, using that level of discernment, using your knowledge of your target segmentation, your personas, to really build out content that speaks directly to them rather than just doing what everyone else is doing. These are, like, to be honest, two fundamental pillars in how I approach my work. And they're also, in my opinion, what has made me the most successful is this dedication to not making content that looks like all other content and sort of challenging myself and the brands that I work with to push beyond that. As I'm sort of wrapping this episode up, I'm thinking about a piece of really common feedback that I hear about myself, which is that folks see this process of, like I mentioned, taking all these things. So what's going on in the general cultural zeitgeist? What are the main value propositions that I can give to my target persona? What is the style of ad they like? What is something that will make them laugh? What is a trending type of creative that I know is popping up on their feed so is worth replicating? Sometimes people look at that process and it feels very mystified. And I think that sometimes people think that creative strategists like myself just have this innate ability to do it. And I would love to clear the air and say that is not true. Anyone can do this work. It's first and foremost about understanding who you're talking to and understanding what your brand is. So just foundational, like brand building, brand book, really understanding your point of view on the market. And then secondary to that, really understanding who your highest yield potential consumers are. So looking at your general segmentation, breaking that down into personas, and really deeply understanding those folks. And then it just comes with getting the reps in. I learned this recently from a coworker of mine. It's about the at-bats, which is baseball terminology. Thank you very much. But it really is true. It's about doing it over and over again until it feels second nature, and also building workflows for yourself and your team that invoke the entire sort of catalog of both personas, product, and angles. It's about, like I mentioned, building the system so that you have a bit of a flywheel and can create content at scale so that you get those at-bats in, you understand what works, and then it just all becomes a nice little systemized and easy to knock it out of the park workflow. And it's really easy for me to just say those words, but I will say, like, it genuinely does take a lot of work, but it's really worth it because I think we all see this all the time. Content is number one. It's the most important sort of part of your brand and your marketing right now. It is, I think, only going to become more critical to understand what good content is for your brand across, the entire levy of paid social channels. And so today was, like, I think, a good episode to sort of reset if you're someone who feels pressurized all the time to create content that is trendy, if you feel like you sort of have to keep up with these things and stay on top of what TikTok audio everyone's using. I just want to say that oftentimes that doesn't actually lead to the most success, and your time is much better spent figuring out those core foundational pieces. Like I mentioned, who are you as a brand? Who are you talking to? Is the second piece of that. And if you're not sure kind of where to start with that, you can go over to the Pilot House website and fill out a lead form and we can chat about it directly. I love doing it. I think it also gives me an opportunity to get more at-bats in, talking to you guys about this stuff. But we've also got a full and incredibly talented team of e-commerce strategists who also live and breathe these things. And working alongside them, you can really see the difference in how we approach paid strategy and that idea of laying a foundation instead of just trying to catch lightning in a bottle with a trend, and really understanding these things to help build that longevity for a brand. I was going to say as well before we go, can head over to the Pilot House website, like I mentioned. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn, just Aves Valerio, or you can drop a comment. I feel like commenting is a lost art, and that kind of brings us full circle back to my best friend in the world not listening to this podcast and saying that it's weird. I don't want her to comment, but I do love to comment. I don't want to get on a tangent at the end of an episode, but I've been really in my commenting era wherever I am on socials, and I love it. It's like, I love to this is so dorky, but I do love telling people that, like, I love their content in the comments because I feel like the internet has really gotten away from us. It's become very negative. So, I mean, I guess if you don't have a positive comment to leave on this podcast, you can leave a negative one. I don't know. I guess you probably shouldn't invite that. I'm just going to stop talking because I'm digging myself into a hole. Thank you so much for listening. Like I mentioned, if you are someone who's, struggling to move past this hamster wheel of trends, or if you just don't know how to build a distinctive voice out there in the marketplace, reach out. I love to talk about this stuff. Truly, it is very fun for me. Thanks so much for listening. Leave a comment, good or bad, and I will talk to you guys next week.